Hi, everyone, and welcome to Weather or Not. I'm WABC Chief Meteorologist Lee Goldberg. In this installment, couple of topics we want to get to. First and foremost, the imminent storm that will end our weekend, a dynamic storm, a high-impact storm. And it's all about rain and mild temperatures, at least to start. Could be a snowy end in some of our higher elevations, but obviously we just came out of a quick cold snap. The cold has no staying power. We talked on a previous episode that the cold may lock in after Christmas. Is that still the case? We're going to look a little bit more closely now that we have new information and we're getting closer to the start of the new year. Is winter going to lock in? We're going to be joined by an outstanding meteorologist, Stephen DiMartino from NYNJPA Weather, and see what his take is on it and if it matches up with what we think is going to happen later in the month, which is more winter. But first and foremost, let's get right to it in this weekend storm and make sure you are weather ready, because there could be a pretty dangerous situation coming up here on Sunday night. All right, so in this edition of Weather or Not, we have an AccuWeather alert, and that's primarily going to be focused on Sunday night. Now, this is a Sunday, Monday impact period, but the brunt of this is going to be happening as we go into Sunday night. All right, let's get into the old impacts, and I've broken it down into four categories here: rain, wind, flooding, and blustery conditions behind the storm, which I'll also tack on some snow potential to it. In terms of rainfall totals, I think we're looking at a range that's about 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches of rain. Now, there are some signs I'm seeing today that as this storm slows down, if it decides to what we call train or have rain going over the same area multiple times, I may have to raise that top end, that ceiling of the rainfall totals. But right now, I like where I stand in a general 1.5 to 2.5 inches of rainfall. The gusts. Now, winds are going to be a big story. We could have some gusts that go over 50 miles an hour. That would bring down some tree limbs, some scattered power outages. The peak is happening there Sunday night. That means we don't want you to travel on Sunday night, and we want you to be super careful on Monday morning for any damage that is out there. Flooding, street flooding for sure, minor to even some moderate coastal flooding. With this roaring southerly wind, we're going to have water piling up in places like Jamaica Bay, maybe Great South Bay. Also on the western end of Long Island Sound, like the Westchester and Connecticut coastline, water can be piling up there. So some minor to isolated moderate coastal flooding. And then in the wake of the storm, again, you have your travel problems on Monday morning, and you have your blustery conditions where the winds are still gusty and then temperatures are falling off through the day through the 40s. We could even end the day in the 30s, and that's happening faster for our north and west. That's why snow could come into the mix. The overall setup on the weather map is this strong cold front that's coming through. But what I want you to think about when you look at this map, there's a lot of fronts. If you were, for instance, the cold front, all right, and you're walking about, and let's say to work out, you've used ankle weights and you put them on, what does that do? Slows you down a little bit, makes you work a little harder. Think of that low pressure that I'm showing you on this front as kind of a weight along the front. So it's going to slow it down, and it's also going to enhance its precipitation. So we'll get into waves of showers on Sunday, but then ultimately, when that low gets closer to us on Sunday night, that's when everything's starting to peak. And I'm concerned that low is forming right over us. And that's what I meant by if that happens early enough, it would slow down some of the heavier rain bands and we'd even get a worse soaking. If the strengthening of that low doesn't happen till later, then it's more Long Island, Eastern Long Island, Connecticut, and more a New England problem. So that's going to be critical. It's a high-impact storm no matter what, but does it really go berserk? And we have big problems Sunday night into Monday, something of concern. Strong cold front behind means gusty and colder conditions, falling temps on Monday. Not bitterly cold, but dropping to seasonable levels as we drop through the 40s over the weekend. And then we actually get into a nice quiet stretch for much of the week next week. All right, let's go in tighter now. So here's this futurecast. Now, we're recording this a couple days before the storm. So these particular models, when it comes to the details, they sometimes have a hard time ironing things out. So I'm going to show you how this evolves, but I'm going to tell you how I think it will probably change, because what we've gotten good at when we look at weather patterns and even some modeling is sort of anticipating their weaknesses and how it will really verify on the weather map. So one thing that we've started to talk about yesterday is that this isn't going to wait until afternoon. We're going to start to get light rain or showers coming in Sunday morning. Look how mild it is, by the way. So if you have any prep for this storm, Saturday's the best day, but could you get out first thing for early risers on Sunday, take care of some things around the home? Sure, it's still mild and the rainfall isn't that steady. Now, as we go through the morning, again, fairly light. Now, this particular model is already showing some heavier downpours coming in. I think it's a little bit overdone, but I think the rain could get a little steadier as we go through the lunch hour and certainly into the afternoon hours. And by the way, maybe you notice those temperatures. I mean, we're talking about temperatures that are spiking into the 50s and even 60s. So later in the day is when things really start to ramp up. And our first problem spot will likely be New Jersey. That's where our heaviest rain is going to start to come in later in the day, even though we could have some pockets of rain that are heavier in the city, into parts of the Hudson Valley, in the Connecticut. By the way, you're on the Jersey Shore, you're over parts of Long Island, you're just getting a mild, windy day out there. And yeah, there can be a couple of showers, but you're really waiting until Sunday night to get into the real stuff, the brunt of this storm. Okay, now we're in crunch time here. We've got very heavy rain Sunday evening over New Jersey, maybe even some rumbles of thunder with this. It's raining very heavily over the Hudson Valley. The winds are whipping out of the south, and what happens is the winds go inland, up in elevation, orographically, just because of the increasing elevation, the wind is force upward. So when you have rising air, you enhance precipitation. And that's why we're expecting heavy rain north and west as we go into the evening hours. And then it's really going to town. I mean, when meteorologist Jeff Smith is covering this late Sunday night, we may have what is the equivalent of almost a squall line going through with some heavy downpours, really gusty winds across the area, potentially some damaging winds. Visibility's going down, pawning on area railways. This is just a time Sunday night where we really just don't want you to travel through the overnight hours. And of course, there are lingering problems in the Monday morning. Now, this is one thing I take a little issue with this particular model. Remember I told you about that ankle weight low that could form along the front? Does it slow down the front? This model is saying yes. I don't know that I buy that. It probably is a little bit more progressive than that. But wherever this does happen, you can see we can get some of our higher rainfall totals because heavy rain goes over the same places multiple times. Again, check it out in the pre-dawn hours on Monday. You've got your heaviest rain over Connecticut and Long Island. The city is out of the heavy rain, but we've still got problems in terms of traveling early Monday. And we've changed over to snow in the Poconos and Catskills, the highest elevations off to the north and west. And then things start to move away. There's still some lingering snow shower as well inland, but we've got by daybreak, basically our heaviest is over and we start to dry out and those winds start to shift off to the northwest and we start to see the cooling temperatures come in as we go through the day on Monday, and I anticipate dropping temperatures. All right, so remember, I just showed you a model that showed a stalling rainfall band. And in that area pink, that would indicate 3 to 5 inches of rainfall. And I don't necessarily buy that right now. Does that mean that a couple spots couldn't go over 3 inches? It's a possibility if the storm is strengthening early enough and it slows down. But right now, I want to give you a more realistic look at what I think the precipitation amounts are going to do. I think we're going to head into 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches total. You can see how we could have some enhanced areas off to the north where I talked about all the lifting going on, or maybe even north and east of New York City, parts of Connecticut, maybe eastern Long Island, because that low is strengthening later in the game where it's New England getting the brunt of some of the flooding rainfall. I mean, regardless, we're still going to get some heavy rain. All right, the wind discussion with this. This is important. When we look at winds, okay, we assess what the winds are doing a few thousand feet up, and they are ripping at about 80, 90 miles an hour, all right? That's what we call a low-level jet. So I've put that graphic up there showing the winds at 5,000 feet, which even at 2,500 feet, they're really, really fast. And if you look at that area of purple, that's winds of 70 miles an hour or more, even over 80 miles an hour. And look how it's over us by Sunday morning. But you need a mechanism to bring those winds down, heavy rainfall. You don't have it yet Sunday morning. You have it when we go into Sunday evening, and then it's all aligned. If you look at where it goes from purple and then just to yellows and drops off quickly, that's the actual cold front coming through or approaching. So that's where I think we're going to have our strongest winds, is that late Sunday night into the wee hours of the morning on Monday. And that is some very impressive winds, as we say, right off the deck. And if we have a heavier downpour or even a thunderstorm, for instance, that's going to grab on those winds. Not that it's going to bring 80-mile-an-hour winds down to the surface, but even if you had, let's say, half of that, you'll have some 50-mile-per-hour gusts. And that's always my threshold for causing some damage. You get over 45, 50-mile-per-hour gusts, we can have some tree limbs that come down, maybe even some scattered power outages as we go through that storm. So we'll also have some very strong winds right behind the system. They'll be coming out of the northwest. They'll be helping our temperatures drop. And I think by later in the day on Monday, those winds start to relax a little bit. But I could even see some gusts close to 40 miles an hour into the day on Monday. So here's a close-up, zoomed-up look. Sunday morning, you start to feel the breezes pick up. We go through the afternoon, some gusts are going close to about 30 miles an hour. Now we go into Sunday night, and this is the real deal. Some gusts that could go over 40 miles an hour. And remember that low I talked about, that ankle weight low, if you will. Look at how you get some reds in the mix. Now, the city's borderline. Could we have some gusts in the city? 40, 45 miles an hour, yes. But look how it's Long Island. And more favorable to get those wind gusts over 50 miles an hour. In a worst case, could there be a 60 mile an hour gust? It's not out of the question there as this storm ramps up. So there's your time period. Everything just focusing on that late Sunday night into early Monday time period. Still gusty as the wind shift to a colder direction, but your gusts are more likely in that 30 to 40 mile per hour range as we go into the day on Monday. Here's putting some numbers on it. Again, supporting what we talked about. In the afternoon hours, you're going to know a storm's coming. There are waves of showers. There are some gusts to 30 miles an hour. But look at that peak as we go through late Sunday night and the wee hours of the morning on Monday. Lots of gusts over 40 miles an hour. And then when you see a model that's showing these type of winds this far out, you know that it could exceed what that model is showing. There's an outlier there where we could get some winds that go over 50 miles an hour. So that's a concern as we go into the day on Monday. All right, so then the colder winds are kicking in on Monday, and this is another challenging part of the forecast because there will be a changeover. As these cold winds crash in, there'll be a changeover of rain to snow. But does that really get down into the core of our area? And I think the answer to that is no. We're likely to see some accumulating snows where you would expect, and the higher elevations well to the north and west. I mean, along that I-81 corridor, you don't want to be traveling from a Scranton to a Syracuse or on I-90 from Syracuse to Albany. There's going to be some pretty good snows there later Sunday night and into that Monday time period. And even a zoomed-in view here, you can see once you get into Pike County, Sullivan, northern Ulster County, that's where we could have actually a few inches of some wet snowfall. But the majority of the area, even if we end with a wet flake in the Hudson Valley in northwest New Jersey, I don't think snow is really an impactful part of this storm. But you go upstate and you have travel plans out I-80 into New Jersey and into Pennsylvania, that's where you have to really be careful. All right, so let's go ahead and just sum up a checklist here of something that you can do. Maybe take advantage of that beautiful weather on Saturday or very early in the morning hours on Sunday. You want to use those days to prepare. Secure loose items around the home, holiday decorations, any plants you've left outside. I mean, these are things that you don't want becoming projectiles during these really strong winds. Clear the storm drains. Of course, still a lot of leaves around. We're going to get some very heavy rain. You want to get those drains working at optimum capacity. And then in terms of travel, can you be out during the day on Sunday? Yes. During the mid-afternoon, but I'd like you to limit travel if you're watching us from New Jersey or over, let's say, like Western Orange County, Poconos and Catskills. That's the time when I think you need to limit travel. But I think the entire area, we want to be off the roads as we go into later Sunday night and early Monday morning. You want to expect travel delays as we go into the Monday morning time period. And of course, it's always turn around, don't drown. Never drive through standing water. You never know the depth of it. It's very difficult to judge. A lot of this is going to be happening during the overnight hours, and you're really putting yourself in harm's way if you start traveling during the overnight. All right, so that is the lowdown on the storm. We'll continue to update you on details, of course, throughout the upcoming weekend. So what does this storm have to do with anything that's going to happen in the long term? Well, sometimes you have sizable storms that they sort of signal a change in the overall pattern. And this storm may be one of those storms that, when we look back in a few weeks, like, hey, remember that big rainstorm and the changeover upstate? That kind of buckled the jet stream a little bit and things started to change after Christmas. So I'll be interesting to see if that happens. So what I want to show you in this particular pattern, we're looking at the steering winds, okay, the jet stream. And the jet stream has been very flat as of late, running from the Pacific all the way to the East Coast. Not many big dips, but now we're starting to see that with this big storm. We get this one out of the way, and we have a little chilly stretch there, Monday into Tuesday, and then we go back to what we've been seeing, which is some more Pacific air. So I do expect some moderation to happen. But look at the cold air, all those purples over eastern Canada. All of a sudden, some Arctic air is starting to show up and wanting to hang out for a little longer. And there's what we call a little blocking in the pattern. In other words, things can't move as fast across the country and get out of here. That would allow some storms to get a little stronger, have a little bit more staying power. Maybe they even have more access to some cold air. Now, it doesn't look like it locks in through the 15th or even into, late next week. But look at that. Another resurgence of that polar air coming in over Hudson Bay and into southeast Canada. It's not over the northeast just yet, but you look at the 18th, and after that, we're seeing more signs that some of that polar air may be coming our way and sticking around a little bit. It's going to evolve gradually, but I still like the idea of seeing some real winter weather lock in late in the month and into the beginning of 2024. Will that mean more big snowstorms? So we'll have more on that as we'll bring in meteorologist Stephen DiMartino from NYNJ PA Weather. It is great to have you again on Whether or Not, Stephen.
Nice to be here. I'm always looking forward to it.
Yeah, happy holidays. The weather set looks fantastic. And now we're actually, instead of doing some decorating, you're actually probably digging into the computers with all the analysis in the short term about the storm coming up and, of course, the long range, too.
Oh, absolutely. There is a lot of information to dive into. And there's really the way that we have the amount of data available to us is amazing compared to where we were 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So yeah, I've been diving into all sorts of data about the storm, how that storm's connected to our long range pattern, and all sorts of good stuff. So let's dive in and check it out.
Now that was actually something I just alluded to before you came on. Sometimes you have these dynamic storms and they kind of signal the pattern change ahead, correct?
Absolutely. You have to understand when you have, let's say, a massive warm-up happening ahead of a cold front, what's really happening here is that the warm air is being transported towards the polar regions, and there's going to be a mass displacement because of that. And when you have that type of mass displacement, that's when things get really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The stratosphere and the troposphere and all sorts of changes are happening in the atmosphere because of it. So definitely a very dynamic storm on the way. And a lot of people are saying, hey, look, it's going to be near 60 degrees. Is this bad news for snow down the way? And I keep on saying, no, this is great news if you're a snow lover, because what's happening is that the air masses are getting displaced and you're getting this transport towards the poles, which fundamentally starts to change the dynamics with the polar vortex. So a lot of interesting stuff definitely evolving here, and that's a lot of fun.
Okay, so some thoughts on this weekend storm. Because I don't want our viewers to be surprised by some things. And listen, we know we're going to have a high impact storm, even if this is pretty progressive. The one concern I would have is when that wave along the front may form, do you have any concerns about it slowing down to the point where we may exceed the 1 to 2.5 inch rainfall totals that I think is sort of universally being advertised? Do we have to worry about a more significant event if that wave matures a little earlier?
Whenever you have a trough that's going into a negative tilt, you always have to be aware of a slower progression of the surface low pressure system. Because what's happening when you get in this negative tilt, think of it like an anchor on the back of your car, right? The more it goes negative tilt, the stronger that anchor is pulling back on that car and slowing it down, right? So our surface low pressure system's that car, and it's getting ready to rocket up into New England. But because of that negative tilt, it pulls back the precipitation shield and causes it to linger a little bit longer. Even more so when you have that negative tilt and you have that rising in the atmosphere with a subtropical jet stream, 850 millibar jet stream, that's very strong, around 70 knots or so, that increases your potential for convection.
Mm-hmm.
So you're having low top thunderstorms develop with precipitable water values, which we talked about last time, approaching 2 inches, enhancing your rainfall rates. The ballpark general idea is 1 to 2 inches, but you get hit with one of those heavy bands of rain within those thunderstorms, and you're easily pushing into the 3-inch range. Combine that with the short amount of time that this is all evolving, that could certainly lead to urban flooding and localized flash flooding throughout the region. And then we have to talk about the winds,
mm-hmm.
More of a concern.
It's funny. You said anchor. I used ankle weights to slow you down when you're walking, but we both have the same concern. So what would be your biggest concern in the impact of this weekend storm?
I would say the winds, only because everyone has their decorations out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're going to have like old St. Nick flying down your street, ending up in your neighbor's backyard or window because you have 40 and 50 mile per hour winds. I don't think Rudolph wants to be flying in those conditions. That's exactly what we're going to be dealing with.
I drove through a neighborhood, and if you're a fan of some of those old Christmas ones. I don't know if you still call it claymation or whatever it was, but Rudolph was just on air recently, and I drove through a neighborhood. It had the whole island of misfit toys all over up, and I'm telling you, they may fly on their own in this store.
Oh man, it's a real concern. I mean, we're bringing all our stuff in on Saturday to have it safe, and we're putting on extra zip ties for our lights that way they don't end up going all over the place. But with this setup, you have winds getting mixed down to 850 millibars down to the surface. So it's crashing down like this within some of this convection.
Mm-hmm.
So you're talking about 40, 50 knot winds descending down on, especially around from about the Delaware River to Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
In that area, you can easily push 40, 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts mixing down within the heavy downpour. So now you're talking about poor visibility early Monday morning, obviously debris, and power outages. Mm-hmm. Just a perfect way to start a Monday morning rush hour.
All right, so let's go ahead and translate this to the long range. So, there are mixed signals in my mind where I'm seeing everything I want to see in respect to what's happening in the stratosphere. And we talked about this in a previous whether or not some warming there, a weakening of the polar vortex. And then I look at some of the modeling through Christmas, and I see it's still a little more Pacific polar than I'd like to see. Although, I just showed recently that, well, you know what? There is a little more polar than there was to go to eastern Canada after the 18th or 20th. Is that starting to show the signs? So we've been sort of talking about this evolution of late month into early 2024. Maybe we start to see some real winter weather lock in. Do you still think that's in the cards, or could it be delayed?
I'm even more confident of the winter forecast I put out than I was a couple of weeks ago. When I look at the winter forecast, not only do I look at the stratosphere, but I'm studying what's going on in the tropics and where we're seeing convection. And this is a really, really important observation. During the MJO going in phases 3, 4, and 5, which, for those who don't know, those are really unfavorable phases, and it's why we're seeing this Pacific flow right now.
Now, you mentioned, just let me stop you, that MJO. Can you just quickly explain what that oscillation is, what we're referring to? Because we talk a lot about the NAO, MJO. What does that mean to the viewer?
The Madden-Julian oscillation, which is also called the MJO, is basically a way for us to study the waves of tropical lifting and where convection develops.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have an understanding of where the strongest lifting is in the atmosphere in the tropics, then you get a pretty good idea of how the pattern is going to evolve in the polar jet stream and subtropical jet stream.
Mm-hmm.
Now you take that and you also have to put it into the background of what type of El Nino or La Nina you're dealing with. So in this case, obviously, we're dealing with El Nino, right? So when we have an El Nino, the really powerful phases that leads to a lot of storms are phases 7, 8, 1, and 2. Okay, 7 is kind of transition, 8, 1, and 2, game on, get ready, watch out for what's evolving.
Mm-hmm.
3, 4, 5 is your mild pattern, like what we're having right now. But here's what's interesting. When we're in the mild pattern, with all this, with the strongest lifting away from the date line, which is what you want to watch out for, because when you have a lot of convection around the date line, that's a signal for a active stormy pattern over the eastern United States, which was researched by Coastal and Usulani. Definitely check that out.
Mm-hmm.
Great research. Now, during the unfavorable phase, we've had a ton of convection around the date line, continuing, despite the negative lifting factors.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a huge warning sign, because what does this tell us? When the MJO moves back into a favorable phase, or just a neutral phase, and just lets El Nino do his thing, this means that you're going to get your strongest convection around the date line, enhancing the potential for an upper level low around the Aleutians. And this is where everything is kickstarted. And this is when you can start looking for your winter weather pattern. Because when the upper level low in Alaska, that's sitting over Alaska, causing very cold conditions and storms, and it's just a nasty up there, when it drops down towards the Aleutians and you start hearing about record high temperatures in Alaska, that's when you better get your heavy coat ready, because the Arctic air is heading our way. And that's exactly what's evolving right now. White Christmas around here is like 10%.
Right.
So if you get a white Christmas around here, I also would suggest going to buy a lottery ticket. You got really lucky. You know, if I get a flurry on Christmas Day, I'm happy. You know, like,
right.
Hey, look, you actually see some snowflakes. The only year where I really remember of a defined white Christmas was like 2009-10. That's it in my life. Like, as far as my childhood, and that was amazing. But at the same time, it caused havoc with delivery, and so we don't really want that. We want Santa Claus to be okay coming in. So
exactly. All right, one last question here when it comes to El Nino, and I think a lot of our viewers have thought, well, I hear about El Nino, it's going to be a mild winter, but I try to impress upon them, listen, we've had some of our biggest winter storms during El Nino years. Do you feel like it's a typical El Nino year where you're going to have a few storms that are really responsible for our total seasonal snowfall, or is this a little different El Nino where we're going to have more of a conveyor belt and multiple opportunities for storms?
First of all, with El Ninos, typically you could say east base El Nino or west base El Nino. And when you have an east base, it's going to be mild. West base, watch out. This year, this El Nino is a little funky, okay? It's shifting from a strong east base to a central base, but because of influences from climate change, the thermal gradient is different. For your backyard, I don't know whether or not you're going to get 20 inches, 40 inches, 600 inches. I don't know. But what I do know is this. We're going to have to be prepared because it's going to be a very active storm track as a result, and someone is going to get quite a bit of snow out of it as a result.
Stephen, that was, I'm fired up. You always give us some great information. I really appreciate your expertise. I want you to have a Merry Christmas, and hopefully the next time we talk is maybe leading into our first big winter storm of the season.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, thanks a lot. Stephen DiMartino from NYNJPA Weather. Another great discussion. So we are going to continue to intensely watch all of the data coming in for our weekend storm and continue to give us our long-range thoughts. Don't forget, you can always check on ABC7NY and in future episodes of Weather or Not. That's this edition. We'll see you next time. Rain or shine, and stay safe.